OK, welcome everyone to today's Google Webmaster Central Office Hours Hangouts. My name is John Mueller. I am a Webmaster Trends Analyst here at Google in Switzerland. And part of what we do is talk with webmasters and publishers like the ones here in the Hangout. Oops, someone has an echo. There are already a bunch of questions that were submitted. But like always, if any of you would like to get started with the first question, feel free to jump on in now. No, that's fine, too. I'll just run through the questions that were submitted. If any of you have comments or questions around them, feel free to jump on in. And we'll try to have some room towards the end for more of your questions that might come up. Do links. Links from tabs. Tabs are used to switch categories on the website's main page that are not visible by default. Have less importance for Google, for example, passed less PageRank or crawled less frequently, etc. No, not necessarily. They should be perfectly fine. So especially if you're doing this for your internal navigation, then that's not something I'd really worry about. I have an e-commerce website, and I show products in categories which include them in I guess, sitemap XML. It's normal to not have any product in a category, so we show nothing found message, and Google marks them as soft 404s. What HTTP code should we return? So this is fairly common in that a lot of sites will have categories where they don't actually have any content yet, or where maybe they temporarily have content, but they don't have it there now. From our point of view, ideally, you would return a 404 for pages like that, because there's no content on those pages. Maybe use a no-index meta tag on that. If you don't do that, if you just return a 200, then normally our systems will pick that up and recognize that and flag that as a soft 404. And a soft 404 is OK, too. It's not the end of the world. It's essentially just a sign that we're not going to be indexing that page like that. Is there any way to speed up recrawling rate of pages or rich snippet refresh rate? We have rich snippets containing prices, and often the price in the snippet is an old one, while the price on the page has already changed. The best way to do this is to just let us know about the change in your sitemap file. So in the sitemap file, you can specify last modification date. And that's what you can use to let us know that this page has changed. And we'll go off and actually look at the new version of that page and see what it looks like, and see if there's any change in the rich snippet, for example, that we could be picking up on.
Can I ask a quick question on that, John?
Sure.
So the other week, there was an interview, and Gary was talking about XML sitemaps and saying that the various factors that contribute to importance, for instance, when crawling and potentially with other things too. So he said if you include things in a sitemap that they're considered more important, presumably then, you've got your custom Word, you've got your standard out-of-the-box WordPress Yoast XML sitemap that just throws everything into it. Yeah. So, for instance, in these types of situations, if somebody wants to make sure that Google's going to kind of give crawling priority to some pages over others, so they've got a massive e-commerce site, it's a good idea in that situation to use this kind of strategy, isn't it? Just make sure you're only really including in that XML sitemap things that really are vital as such.
You can pretty much include everything in your sitemap file. We'll try to crawl that. The important thing with the sitemap file, specifically in a case like this, is that it's a reasonable sitemap file, that we've learned to be able to trust it, in the sense that you don't use, like today, as a last modification date for all of the pages across your website, but rather that you use a last modification date in a realistic way, so that we kind of learn that this last modification date is actually some useful information that would help us to better understand crawling.
So, for instance, a good way to do it would be to use kind of the server response code and make sure the server response code is correct in terms of date and time of last modification.
Oh yeah. I mean that. Yeah, I mean that in any case.
Okay. But obviously, you do get some sitemaps that seem to. I think Drupal's really quite bad for this. I look at them sometimes and I think, no, I'm sure that post from 2011 that you still got included in your XML sitemap with about 5 words on it wasn't last modified today. And you do see this kind of this automatic generation where people have either configured it to just say use today's date, which is just nonsense. That can lead you into some issues, can't it, really? Just from a crawling perspective.
Well, shouldn't cause problem in that case, but what will happen is we won't trust that last modification date, and then if you do make a change and let us know about it with that date, then we'll kind of ignore that. So it's not that it causes more problems if you have it wrong. It's more that we don't really know what to do with that date in a case like that.
And start to tell the truth on your XML sitemap dates. That actually then starts to be realized that you're not lying anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Would you say that the more traffic the site receives from Google, the more links and recommendations should that site generate in order to stay ranking and move to a higher level? I don't know. Sometimes that happens naturally. Sometimes that doesn't happen so naturally. I think that isn't necessarily related directly. So it's not the case that we'd say, oh, we send you this much traffic, therefore we expect you to get more links over time because of that. That's usually not the way that it works. Does Google take into account last modified HTTP header when crawling pages? Can properly set up last modified header speed up indexing and recrawling of pages with a big amount of pages? We do use the last modification date. I believe it's mostly for like the if modified since type crawling, where we check the URL and ask your server, has this page changed since that date, or since a specific tag that we give you. And your server will be able to respond and say, yes, here's the new content, or no, that page hasn't changed at all. And then you basically save yourself some time. A lot of the bigger CMSs, they handle this automatically. And essentially, there's usually nothing special that you need to do in that regard, especially for the more common CMS setups. Map the pre-existing G site to a custom domain. I assume this is like a Google Sites site. To a custom domain, Google Sites automatically adds rel canonical for the site's custom domain, though since both the Google site and the custom domain are indexed. How long for the canonical to cause Googlebot to remove the Google site URLs? Probably not that quickly. So what will probably happen is we'll know about both of these URLs. So if you do a site query for one of these URLs, then we'll show that to you because we know about it and we think you're looking for that. But what will happen is we'll concentrate all of the signals that we have on the designated canonical. So we'll pass anything we know about links, about anything else around that site, how we want to show it in rankings, the relevance of that site, to your canonical, the one that we pick up for indexing. But we may still know about the non-canonical version. So if you do a site query, you'll probably still see that. But that's not a sign that anything is broken. So there's nothing you really need to force there, nothing you need to kind of like manually take that out of the index or anything like that. We're probably already picking that up properly. A good way to kind of check this, which works in a lot of cases, is to look at the cached version of the page. And if the cached version of the page tells you on top the URL is the preferred canonical that you've specified, then we're already indexing it like that. We're just showing you the other URL because we think that's what you're looking for, but we're already indexing it primarily with your preferred canonical. Does overall count and quality of links to a website play a role in content quality algorithms like Panda? Let's say the site has great links from reputable sites. Are the signals for content quality evaluated differently, and is the effect less demoting? In general, we try to use signals that are independent of each other. So as much as possible, we try to get like a broader set of information rather than just mixing the existing signals up in a different way. So when we're looking at the quality of the website, we'll probably primarily focus on the website itself and any signals that we can get out of that, rather than like mixing in signals from other sides. Because as soon as you mix in signals from other sides, then you're kind of like using those signals multiple times. You don't really know what happens when things change in our algorithms over time. So ideally, we would really focus on individual signals separately. But sometimes that's not as easily done.
Sorry to interrupt. Does that mean, therefore, that Panda and Penguin, for example, are completely separate from each other? It's not that you're going to be more likely to suffer from one because you suffer from another?
Usually that would be the case. So I'm not 100% certain of how they implemented this on the back end, but in general, these would be kind of separate things. They're looking at separate issues, and they use separate signals. So as soon as you kind of mix the signals together in multiple parts of the algorithm, then as soon as you change that signal slightly, then you're changing parts of the algorithm that you're probably not even aware of. So that's something where we try to keep that as separated and clean as possible.
OK, thanks.
We're migrating our e-commerce site to a new CMS where we would have a choice of URL structure. What would you advise is the best way to set up URLs for products? Is it domain.com/category/product title, or is it better to do domain.com/product title? Essentially, totally up to you. My general recommendation when it comes to websites is to pick a URL structure that you can keep for the long run, because every time you make URL structure changes, that's a pretty big change on a website, because we have to essentially recrawl the whole website. We have to relearn all of the links, all of the context of the pages on the website, because they're different URLs. So this is a pretty big change that I wouldn't just randomly do. So in some of these cases, even if you're moving to a new CMS, maybe it makes sense to keep the old URL structure, even if it doesn't look that great. Or if you are moving to a new URL structure, then think about what kind of URL structure you'd want to have maybe 5 or 10 years down the line, and make sure that you're already doing that as much as possible. Or if you want to move to HTTPS at some point in the next, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, and you're making a URL structure change now, you might as well include that now as well, so that you've kind of taken that extra bump out that might happen later down the road when you do have to make that URL structure change. So ideally, I think, who was it? Like the inventor of the web has this great article out there, Cool URLs Don't Change. Ideally, you'd be able to take any URL from your website and just plug that into a browser in 10 years' time, and it would still work. And that's kind of what I'd recommend aiming for. I think on our side, when it comes to our algorithms, we're pretty good at handling site structure changes, but it's not perfect. You'll always see this fluctuation period of sometimes a couple of months until things even settle down into the previous state. So don't just run off and make URL structure changes just because you think they look good now, but rather think about what you really want to have maybe 10 years down the line, and try to pick a URL structure like that.
John, can I just ask a quick question on that
Sure.
one? So I was thinking about that not long ago, and you get like annual events in a lot of industries that are the same, shows, or even in digital marketing, you have like the same events a lot of the time. Yeah, so PubCon, whatever. Blah, blah. So you know, you get people that tend to include like the year and the dates, etc., 2016, 2015, 2017 in the URL, and then they just dump it and 301 it to the next year, and then every year you end up with another redirection. Yeah, as such. I know it's only small, but over time on a site that's actually got a lot of annual events, that could add up to quite a lot of cruft, if you like, over the years. So would it make more sense to, if you could, just keep one URL and just change the content every year?
Yes.
Yeah. On a big site with a lot of like event-based annual stuff, it would just make sense just keep nurturing a URL, wouldn't it, with content that is the same effectively, but based on a different year.
Yeah, I mean, what you generally do is take like last year's content and move it to an archive section. But if you have one URL for that event, then that's a lot easier for us to understand that this is the URL for that event. Otherwise, what often happens is people search for that event, and they see last year's entry in the search results, because that's the one where we have all the signals, right? So if you have if you like keep changing the URL, then that makes it a lot harder. Whereas if you have one main URL for that event, and then after that event is over, you move that content to kind of like an archive section for last year with last year's URL, then that's something that makes it a little bit easier for us to understand what we should be focusing on. And this is something that we run across on our side all the time, or rather every year as well. Yeah. For example, with Google I/O, people will search for Google I/O, and they land on last year's site, because it's kind of like tied to last year's site, and that was the one that everyone linked to last year, or that was really popular last year. So we end up pointing to the wrong version.
If you have one URL, you're just going to get all the links, and the URL is just going to keep maturing stronger over the years, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, sometimes there are practical reasons why you can't do that. If there are like different departments handling that, if there are different agencies setting these websites up, you can't easily like just reuse the same URL all the time. But in an ideal situation, you would have one URL for the event, for the current event, essentially. And when that event is over, you take that content and you put it into an older version. You can do that for products as well, if you have different product generation. So if you have, I don't know, a specific phone model, and you know that every year you're going to be updating that, then you could have one main landing page for that phone, and you just put last year's model into a separate URL for last year.
Mm-hmm. So effectively, just keep nurturing the URLs all the time, if you can.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Real, that's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Can you provide a little bit more context around the rumored Phantom update in June of this year? My e-commerce site has suffered badly, and we're struggling to find the causes. I'm not sure specifically which of the many updates that we make what is like the Phantom update of last June. So it's really hard to say there. In general, we make a lot of changes on our algorithms, and a lot of them are really tied around the quality of websites, to better understand how websites work, how relevant these are for specific search results. So that's something where there's unlikely to be like one HTML line that you can just tweak to make things better. What I would do in a case like this is maybe go to one of the webmaster forums and get advice from peers, from other webmasters who have similar sites, who might have run into similar problems, and get tips from them, specifically with regards to your site. Get some honest and direct feedback on your site, and see what you can do to really significantly improve the website overall. What's the best format for adding infographics to a website? In general, I'd use PNGs in uncompressed format. Otherwise, you get these weird jagged edges. But essentially, for image search, use whatever makes sense. Hi, John. Could you shortly, briefly tell us how seriously we should take 404 notifications in Search Consoles? Our customers keep coming back with this question, and it would be great to have your opinion. This is something that we hear regularly, in that people are sometimes confused when they see a rise of 404 errors in Search Console. Is that a problem that they need to take seriously? Will that affect their rankings or not? And from our point of view, 404s are a perfectly valid technical thing to do on a website for URLs that don't exist. So if we're crawling URLs that don't exist on your website, then by all means, give us a 404 so that we know that these URLs don't exist. And that's perfectly valid. There's absolutely no reason to kind of hide those 404s. They don't affect the ranking of the rest of your content. We show that in Search Console primarily so that if you're accidentally returning a 404 for something that you thought should be showing content, then that's something you might be able to notice there and to fix on your website. But otherwise, if it's a URL that doesn't exist anymore, or that never existed, or that's kind of malformed, that has bad parameters in it, then it's perfectly valid to return a 404. And that's not something that I would really worry about. A good way to kind of recognize if there are any important 404 errors is to look at that list in a default order, which is by priority. The priority is a kind of a mixed metric from our side that takes into account whether or not that URL was shown in search, if that URL was in a sitemap file, for example, if it has internal links. And usually the higher priority URLs that are shown there are the ones that we think are the most important, that might have content or might have had content in the past that we would have wanted to index.
Can I ask a quick question on that, John? It is actually on that. So firstly, I was reading something the other day. Gone is never gone, is it really? Nothing's ever gone as such. There's always a record.
It's very philosophical.
Yeah, but there is a record forever, isn't there? It's like a URL that made years back. It's just there's still a record of it. That's it. Still there, isn't it? Somewhere. Yeah. The other thing is some of the messages that are coming out in Webmasters when you get like this raft of 404s visited. Even if they're 410s, the message is saying 404, which might be part of the reason why people are getting quite alarmed, because they think they've got 404s when actually you're visiting stuff that is like 410. When you're looking Webmaster Tools, or I shouldn't call it that anymore, Search Console, it actually says 410, and I've got a huge amount of them. But the message on the email, the automated email, says 404. So I don't know, maybe.
OK.
More things.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
From our side, we don't really care that much about 404 or 410.
Yeah.
They're essentially the same for us. There's a very subtle difference there, but it's usually not something that sites really need to worry about. But the point on gone is never gone, that's definitely something also to keep in mind, in that sometimes our systems will just say, oh, I have a lot of time to recrawl more stuff from your website. Therefore, I'll check out these 1,000 URLs that I saw maybe 5 years ago that returned a 404 then, just to double check that they still return a 404. So that's kind of a reason you might see a rise in 404s, even if it's not related to anything that you recently did on a website.
John, on that subject, sorry, I'm just a few people, us included, have very recently seen a massive increase in legacy kind of 404 and 410 errors in Search Console, far more than kind of we've seen before. Again, nothing wrong with the site, and it kind of falls into what you're saying there. And I know Jennifer Slegg asked you a question yesterday about, and I think you've answered this before, if people see a sudden increase in Googlebot activity, does that mean there's a manual action coming? Does that mean an algo update's coming? And I think you said no, and you've said no before. But again, over the last few weeks, we and a lot of people have reported, I mean, for example, on I think the 3rd of August, we saw our crawl errors jump from 1,000 to 10,000. And then on the 1st of September, we saw them jump from 10,000 to 50,000. Now, again, nothing wrong with the site. These are all crawl errors from 2, 3, 4 years ago. And even, I mean, you mentioned, look where they're linked from. Is it a sitemap file, so forth? But even the sitemap files that are referenced in the link from are 2 years old. And I'm just wondering, I appreciate that you've already said that an increase in Googlebot activity doesn't mean anything's happening or there's anything to worry about. And I appreciate that it's information only, these crawl errors. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong, unless you want to check and there is. But is there any reason why people are seeing this at the moment? this sudden increase? Is it Penguin related at all?
No. So I've seen a few reports like that, and I wanted to double check with the team on that as well. We looked into a couple of these reports, and they were essentially just our algorithm saying, oh, I have all these old URLs. I just want to double check them.
Is it a capacity thing, John? If you've got like spare capacity on your side, is it that it might just hit a sweet spot and you've got like nothing queuing or whatever, or you just got like extra capacity and you just do like a lot more activity all of a sudden? Yeah.
That could be the case. Yeah. Yeah. It's weird that a lot of these are kind of jumbled together now, like you mentioned, that they're kind of all on the same time. So I wonder if we changed anything specific there. But in practice, from a webmaster's point of view, you don't need to take action on this. For us, it's also a good push to try to figure out how we can make these reports a little bit more actionable, so that we don't scare people out with like, oh, there's a big rise in 404 errors. And actually, when you look at it, it's like, well, that can happen. It has no immediate action item for the webmaster.
May I ask you something, maybe?
Sure.
For example, I have a website regarding real estate and apartments in the offer. And often apartments are not actual at the time, so I have a 404 message. Is it maybe a good solution for the customers, or maybe for indexing the pages, to put some message on the 404 URL and put maybe the message for the customers go to that page which have the similar apartment or something like that, from the perspective of Google indexing or something like that?
Google, for search, we wouldn't look at the content of a 404 page, but you can make it useful for users. And that's one of our recommendations.
Yeah.
So if you know that there are related items, or if there's a replacement, or if you have a search field for your website, then these are all good things to put on a 404 page, so that users, when they go there, when they click an old link, then they can still stay within your website and find something else.
Yes, because one more question. As I understood, I'm not a webmaster, unfortunately, but I'm the owner, and my webmaster doesn't following you. Maybe it should do that. But as I understood, the Google is taking everything what is good to the how can you say, to the customers, to the visitors, and so on. So I think that's the good solution for the customers and visitors. So it will be good for indexing my website and etc.
So if this is text on a 404 page, we wouldn't use that, because for us, if you say this is 404, then we say, well, it's up to you what you put on here.
Yeah,
but if it helps your users, then indirectly that can help us in search, where if users stay on your website, if users recommend your website more to other people because they can find what they're looking for, then that's something that we can pick up on and use for search.
Just one more question. Which kind of, let's say, redirection should I use in that cases? To the home page or something similar to the previous content of 404?
I would not redirect. I would just show a 404 page. So
Okay.
what will happen when we see a redirect like that to the home page? We will think that, oh, this page disappeared, and we will count it internally as a 404.
Yeah.
So we will already see it as a 404.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right. Let me run. Unless you have some more 404 questions, someone. OK. Let me run through some more of the questions, and then we'll have more time for anything else that has been collected until then. If a title tag of a web page is more than 70 characters, does Google consider the rest of the title? We do take into account the whole title of a page. And what will happen is, in the search results, we'll try to show a title that matches what we think the user is looking for, to kind of highlight the relevance of that page for the user for that specific search that they're doing. So it's not so much that we would like cut it off at the first 70 characters, but rather we would try to maybe pick a part of the title or rewrite a title and show that to the user in search. A URL with ABCDEFG equals 2345, and the canonical is ABC. Why do big sites use this? Adding more canonicals would affect the site. How would Google treat that? So this kind of goes back into a similar question as before with the canonicals, in that we will notice this kind of canonical tag on those URLs, and we'll try to fold that together. Big sites sometimes do that because they need tracking parameters, because they need to do other things within the URL when the user is navigating within a website. So they'll sometimes add like these crafty parameters to the URL. From our point of view, that's not always ideal, but that's the way that the web is, and we have to live with that. So the canonical tag is a great way to let us know what you really want to have used as that URL for indexing.
Hi, John.
Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
Actually, we have created AMP pages for our website, and we get the error that missing structured data element. So in the search console, but our website is not related to news or blogs. So how do we declare our website? Like eBay has declared its website as a simply website. So how do we declare our website?
For AMP in particular, at the moment, we're showing it in the top stories carousel, which is only for kind of news type sites. So for that, if you have content that would fit in there, then I would use the news or the, I think, what is it, the article markup on the AMP pages. If you have pages that don't match those kind of news articles, then you don't need to put any structured data on those pages at all. Once we start showing AMP in the normal search results, we'll be able to take that into account regardless of any structured data on those pages. That's something that at the moment we're testing. There's a demo link that you can look at, which is, I think, g.co/amp demo.
Yeah.
If you test that on your phone, you can see how we show any kind of AMP page in the search results. And for that, you don't need to have any structured data at all.
OK, thank you.
Is it correct? Google picks up short, qualified explanations for POIs from any website with expertise, trustworthiness, etc., and shows it in rich snippets on top of the search results, not only from Wikipedia. So I think perhaps this question is mixing up different types of content. Essentially, when it comes to the knowledge graph information that we do show sometimes on the side, sometimes on the top of the search result for a specific entity, then we do try to take into account the kind of facts that we've collected over time that we've been able to verify from a variety of sources. And sometimes, if it's from one source directly, we'll be able to link to that, refer to that. Sometimes it's just a collection of information that we have there. So for example, opening hours, sometimes we'll be able to take that from their Google local page, sometimes from their website directly, sometimes from some other page where they're publishing their own local business opening hours. So that's kind of correct in the sense that this information doesn't just come from Wikipedia.
One more question, can I?
Sure.
I have one accident, let's say, because I change my webmaster, changing my website design. So we pick up the theme from, let's say, WordPress or something like that. And in that theme, it was no index, unfortunately, which he didn't see. So suddenly my website disappeared, and we were on first page on Google at my in search results. So I was asking him, he didn't know what's happening. Then I go to the forum, and they gave me very good advice. So I said to him, what's the problem? we fixed that, he fixed that, in fact, and we are back in 10 days, last 10 days, so it's good now. But now I'm full of fear, of course. So I'm now following and so on and so on. And I have one question. I have two URL now. Is it a problem? As I understand, it's not a problem. You will pick what is canonical because it's still the old site in the search results, and the new one with the new URL is it's not. Yes, it's just how I can say is the same nekretnine obradovic.rs, but the other parts are different because of some folders, as I understood.
Yeah.
So is it a problem for me? Now I have two at this moment.
Don't get too many.
Yeah, no, but
I would try to pick one, the one that is working the best, and make that the canonical version. And for that, you can use the canonical meta tag, link tag, to let us know which of these is the canonical version. Or you might be able to set up a redirect from the old version to the new version.
Which kind of redirect? 301, am I right?
301 is the right one, yes. If you're permanently moving to the new URL, then a 301 is the correct.
For every page, or okay, he will know, I suppose, my webmaster.
No. It's something that you would do for each page individually, so that when you go to one, like the contact page on the old website, it redirects you to the contact page on the new website.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
John, on that point that the chap was just asking about. Sorry, I didn't know his name. You know, you have these kind of situations where you're migrating across, and you can end up, now that we've got like HTTP, HTTPS, www, non-w, etc. And you look in your webmaster, the Google Search Console, you can often see there's like, they're not obviously the same because there's this transition going on, and even things like internal links on one can have different counts, and you know, it's obviously very different journeys that are going on for effectively 4 versions of the same website. So you can put the canonical in place, and obviously it takes a long time sometimes for some of them old URLs, especially if you've had like 4 versions that you canonicalize into one, yeah, with the HTTPS. Would it make sense, whilst to sort of hurry that process along, to use remove from index in some of the other versions of the site? You know, like you've got this one that you canonicalize into, but then I suppose if you remove them from index, the canonical won't get picked up on.
I would not use remove from index for any kind of site maintenance and kind of the normal site changes on a website, because remove from index essentially just suppresses it in the search results. It doesn't actually like physically remove it from the index. It just doesn't show it. That means if we still pick the old version as a canonical, then suddenly nothing is shown in the search results, and you have even more of a problem. So
replace it with the new one, effectively.
Yeah. So in a case like this, I would set up a redirect if that's possible, and just let it be. I wouldn't try to force it. You don't really need to force that in general, in the sense that if someone goes to the old URL, they'll be redirected to the new URL anyway. It's not a loss if they accidentally use the old URL.
So you are more for the redirection 301 than for canonical. Let's say if you are picking up. Okay.
If you can do a redirect, I think that's the best approach.
Okay.
And just one thing on that point, say you're struggling, say you've got a massive website, e-commerce, and you're struggling to get it all sort of re-indexed on the new version. Say, you've got a, you get so much crawl, etc. If you submit to Google, I suppose there's no point doing that, is there? You wouldn't want to try and somehow kind of emphasize the importance of some of the pages or some of the sections that are not getting re-indexed. Could you sort of pass some signals across somehow to sort of prioritize the parts that you want push forward a bit more? No?
I think that all happens automatically. If you redirect, if you have a canonical setup, then both of these are signals that you prefer the other URLs, and we'll focus mostly on those other URLs. So that kind of just happens naturally. There's nothing special you'd need to do there.
May I ask you regarding this redirection? When I use fetches Google, for example, for the URLs which have apartments on that URL, it said there in message 200. It's not said 301. I'm now checking my webmaster, so I have to do that. What does it mean? Is it not 301 or what? And he said he made redirection. When you click on old, it goes on new, but it said 200 there.
That would usually mean that there is no redirect for that URL. So maybe I don't know. There are some ways that you can do a redirect with JavaScript, for example, that isn't directly visible with a 301 redirect. Ideally, you would have a 301 redirect from the old URL to the new one. And in Fetches Google, it should clearly show that.
So you think he maybe make a redirection with JavaScript, for example, or something? Okay,
it's possible. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Are you checking the new URL status code though? There, is that what when you said that you're checking your webmasters thing? Are you checking the new URLs code? Yeah.
Yeah, he said 200. Okay, for example.
Yeah, but that would be if the new URL is the one that you're checking. That would be 200 OK anyway, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, if it's a new URL, then that should be correct, the 200. If you're checking the old URL, then you should see that redirect code.
301.
Yes.
301. Okay. Thanks.
All right, let me run through some more of the questions here. Last chance to get questions here, I guess, at least in this format. One short question. Tell us, please, is it a good way to change the page title, description, canonical tag by JavaScript, or the tag manager if we don't have access to the HTML source code? I wouldn't say it's a great thing to do, but you can do that. We do render the pages and take into account what is in the final rendered version. So if you use JavaScript to change the title, description, canonical, if you add a no index to those pages in an extreme case with JavaScript, then we would pick that up and take that into account. Please share benefits of consolidated website pages. For example, all pages contain the same content are linked within the internal link structure a similar way. For example, MacBook Pro and then with dashes. In general, if you consolidate the content onto one strong page, then that makes it a lot easier for us to understand that this is really a great page on that topic, that this is a page that is really relevant for this information. Whereas if you spread things out across a lot of different pages, then you're kind of diluting the information that you have. And if you have individual pieces of content that do stand on their own, then maybe it makes sense to put them in a separate page. But if it's essentially just variations of the same thing, then I would put that into one page instead of kind of spreading that out across many pages. We provide payroll in all 50 states. I am contemplating on creating a landing page for each state, and therefore the content is most likely to be duplicate. Will I get penalized? Maybe. So this sounds very similar to a kind of a doorway site situation where you're essentially just swapping out the keywords on these pages, and all of the content is exactly the same and leading to the same main website. And from our point of view, that goes into a little bit of the previous question where you're diluting your content across a lot of different pages, but also goes into kind of a web spam situation where the manual web spam team might come and say, this is actually someone trying to be spammy and appear very relevant for each of these individual entries, but actually it's just a national entry instead. So that's something I probably shy away from doing like that, and instead really focus on creating one really, really strong website for your business overall, for the work that you do. On maybe one of those pages, you can list all of your local business entries if you have individual offices in different locations. But I'd avoid taking the content and duplicating it, just swapping out the location name. Our web designer placed several images on our site as div background images. I've heard a common accessibility workaround is to add a title attribute to the div tag. Does Google index div background images, or would it be better to convert these to image? We probably don't index those for image search. Whether or not that's a problem for you is essentially up to you. Sometimes if these are just generic background images, then you don't really need to have them indexed in image search anyway, so it's not so much of a problem. On the other hand, if these images are really important for your website, for example, if you're a photographer and you're trying to highlight your work in the search results, then maybe it makes sense to use image tags instead of this kind of CSS div background image setup. All our subdomain pages indexing are going down. What's the best practice to find the issue? That's really hard to say without looking at the website. So sometimes what happens if you have a lot of different subdomains that are actually showing the same content, we're perhaps folding things together and picking one canonical that's on one of these pages, but instead of indexing all of the different versions. Other than that, there are lots of things that can lead up to the indexing of pages going down. Everything from crawling issues to maybe duplicate content issues, like I mentioned, to meta tags, technical issues on the pages. All of that is kind of possible. What I'd recommend doing there is going to one of the Webmaster Help forums and getting advice from peers who have probably seen similar cases in the past and who can look at your specific situation and say, yes, this is a problem, or no, this is not a problem that you need to worry about. And maybe they can even give you some tips on what you can do to improve your website overall.
Okay, one more question. Maybe it's logical for me, but it's not logical for you. My home page is the most visit page on my website, and it's not indexed on the first pages like other pages. Is it logical or not? I'm not sure with that.
That can be the case. That's it's not always the case that the home page is the most popular in search page as well. So that's not something I would say is a problem. It really depends on the website and how you think people are going. So for example, for real estate, if people are searching for specific types of houses directly and going to that category page or that house listing directly, then that's probably fine. They don't need to see your home page.
Yes, there is more text on the page of apartment, for example. So I suppose there is a lot of more information for them there than on home. Okay. Thanks.
Exactly. It really depends on what they're searching for and what you have on your site.
Yeah.
Can I ask a really quick question on that one, John?
Sure.
So I often see that, you know, when somebody's had like a blog and they've just gone crazy building blogs and they end up with lots and lots of really old and legacy content, and they'll often then 301 redirect incorrectly up to their blog main page. You know, you've got your commercial part of the site and their blog, etc. So they start redirecting everything old to the top of the blog or the category that the blog content was in. Yeah. And often they end up with, like, you know, in the internal links table in Google Search Console, this really crazy, like, skewed. Their homepage is actually like, it ends up on page 2. So it's almost like they've just like messed up all their own internal linking as such via 301 redirection. Can that present issues kind of from time to time?
I think that can be normal as well. So sometimes people do these kind of things. I wouldn't necessarily worry about the internal linking table, especially the counts that are there. So this is useful to see that we're picking the content up and the links that we're picking those up. but the counts there, I think, can be a bit misleading if you're worried too much about the order and the absolute numbers there.
Are they accurate? Because they don't seem to be. Do they include breadcrumbs, for instance? Do they include breadcrumbs in that?
I don't actually know what all is included in the internal links there. They're probably accurate in the sense that they're counting what they should be counting, but whether or not they're counting what you think they should be counting, that's probably a difference. So that's something, for example, with some of the other reports that I found, where as an engineer, when you look at the code and you say, well, it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, as a webmaster, when you look at it, you're saying, well, it's not really giving me the information that I'd like to be seeing. So it might be working as it was coded, as it was intended, but that might not be what would be the most useful for you. So these are things that are really helpful for us to kind of figure out what we should be changing with some of these reports.
Yeah. OK. Yeah. So it's actually not accurate then, as such.
Oh, it's accurate, but it's not always exactly what you expect it to be. So,
in the Webmaster Help section, it actually says that the internal link structure is a kind of that if the order, or if the important pages are not towards the top, that you should actually reconsider your internal link structure or reviewing your internal link structure, because the internal links are seen as an indicator of relative importance of the URLs within your site. So that's actually in the Webmaster Help section. Is that not true?
I'd have to look at that. I don't know. I don't know offhand what it actually says there. I think a lot of this is also based on almost earlier times when a lot of people would make their websites manually. And in those cases, you would often run into situations where parts of the site were not linked at all from other parts of the website. And that's really a kind of a critical situation. But if you're using a common CMS, if you have a normal website setup, nowadays that's much less of a problem. And I think that's the same with a lot of the technical issues on a website, where if you're using a modern setup, then kind of by default, all of these search-related, these technical issues, they kind of disappear, and they're not something that you really need to worry about.
So a decent framework seems to work.
I mean, it's really a problem if we can't find any internal links to some of these sections, because then we can't consistently crawl the website and find everything. So sometimes we'll see that with big government websites that have a lot of legal documents, for example, and the only navigation that they provide is a search form. And if we don't know how to kind of deal with the search form, we can't find all of these documents that they provide, because we can't really crawl through the website. But for a normal blog, if you're using something like WordPress, Blogger, any of those common setups, the internal navigation is essentially guaranteed. It's not something that you can easily even break.
But on e-commerce, it can be really messy, can't it? You've got all the facets, all the parameters, and that's where I'm thinking, you've got an internal link list, and it's got 300,000.
Yeah, I mean, it can be complicated, but we're used to dealing with complicated websites. It's hard for us when there's absolutely no working internal navigation that we can really follow to the whole website itself.
And breadcrumbs can help with that, can they, or are they not?
Sure. Any kind of internal linking can help.
Right. Okay.
Just to ask you, I have me again. I have a double meta descriptions now. It shows up when I put the let's say new website is the same URL, but is it because of those different extensions of URL or not?
It could be. Yeah. I mean, you can. I think you can click on the button there to show the URLs.
Yes, I see the old, let's say, URL of the department, the new URL of the department.
Yeah. So once you have the redirect set up, that will improve over time.
Okay. Everything is on redirection. I see.
Yes.
Okay.
So you know what to do.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, let me try to run through some of the questions that are left. I booked this room for half an hour longer so we can stay a little bit longer. But maybe I can run through some of this stuff quickly. The page contains lists of URLs related to category pages, subcategory pages. In similar way, we have 20 pages with the same links and same meta content. Will Google consider these pages as duplicate URLs or content? If it's just a matter of the links and the meta descriptions on these pages, then that's usually less of a problem. If the content itself is duplicated across all of these pages, then we would recognize that content as being duplicated, but it's not that we would count it against your website and say, this is a bad website because some of the content is duplicated. Sometimes repeating the same things on multiple pages is completely normal. For example, if you have one product that is listed in multiple categories, then of course you will have that listed in multiple categories. And from a technical point of view, we try to deal with that on our side. Ideally, if you can make separate pages really have unique content on their own, it makes it a lot easier for them to stand out on their own and for us to recognize the relevance of those pages individually. One of our subdomains migrated from HTTP to HTTPS, and now we see all our subdomains indexing are going down since header and footer links are including all subdomains. Does this migration affect indexing? What's the best practice to find the issue? So what's probably happening here is you're looking at the HTTP version of the site in Search Console. And to see the indexing of the HTTPS site, you have to verify that version too and look at the indexing charts there. So you'll probably see HTTP going down and HTTPS going up. And that's the way it should be. So we look at those sites as separate sites, and you need to look at the reports separately in Search Console. What you can do to make this a little bit easier, not specifically for indexing, but more for the search analytics side, is to create a property set where you put all of these versions of your site into one property set. And then in Search Analytics, you'll see a consolidated view across the HTTP and HTTPS versions of your website.
Really, John, really quick feedback on that property set thing that actually a client of mine flagged up the other day. You can't add, if you're the owner and you create that set, you can't add any administrators to see that set, can you?
No, you need, well, everyone needs to create it themselves, essentially.
But you can't create it unless you're...
Unless you're verified.
Yes. If you're an actual administrator, so I could create one if I'm an administrator.
Yeah.
So I could create my own on that.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's
would it
something
be,
other people have brought up as well.
Would it be easier if just you know, when the owner adds you as an administrator, they then, because usually they sort of add their sites to GSC because often they didn't know beforehand. Then they add you, and then you say make a set. Wouldn't it be easier if they could just add you at that point? The set they create.
I don't know why we decided to do that. I think that, I mean, that's something we did discuss within the team, but I'm not sure what actually led to that decision like that. But I can double check.
Yeah. Excuse me. Regarding pictures, is it clever solution to give the name of the pictures, for example, for the location of the apartment? I'm always giving the example of my website because maybe it's the best way to understand the other people.
Yes.
Is it a good solution to give the name of the picture, for example, of the location, apartment of that location for every picture, or not? Because it repeating then all the time or something like that. I don't.
You can use the name or something descriptive as the name of the image. That does help us for image search.
Yeah, and to put that in which way on the site?
So as the file name for the image, for example, as a subtitle, as an alternate text for the image. Yeah. These are all things that you can do.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Is there any way to fight bad linking to your website from really bad unrelated sites other than the Disavow tool in Search Console, Webmaster Tools? The disavow file is really what you should be looking for there. Ideally, you would just use a domain entry in the disavow file and say, hey, this bad site is linking to my site. Google, please ignore these links. And we will drop those links from our index. So that's something that works really well, especially if you find problems like this. In general, I wouldn't go out and proactively always look for bad sites that might be linking to my website. Usually, we already filter all of those out. But if you do run across a situation where you see something really weird happening and you really want to make sure that Google understands this properly, then feel free to use a disavow file.
On that, John, you know that there's a massive issue at the minute with .xyz.
Yes.
It's like I feel like I'm spending my life just checking the XYZ, just
Yeah.
there. It's just terrible.
I mean, we kind of notice these. We notice these as well, and it's not something that you really need to focus on too much. I noticed on Twitter, one of the people from the XYZ TLD responded as well and took a list that someone posted and essentially said, OK, we took care of this. So if you want to find that guy and send them a spreadsheet of the domains that you've run across, maybe they'll be able to handle that as well.
Do you reckon that those are already filtered out in your list of bad sites?
I wouldn't say that they're all filtered out, but we see kind of spammy use of domains and subdomains fairly frequently, and our systems are kind of used to that, and we can deal with that fairly well.
Right. So we don't need to disavow them automatically, because that's quite time-consuming. There's a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, they're good sites on XYZ as well. There's, I think, even the one from Google on XYZ.
I think that's actually the good site on XYZ currently.
Hi, John. There's one more question. There are some times that we are having dashboard pages for specific username. So they use some username handles in the URL, and as well as they sometimes post some offensive content on the profile page, which gets indexed in the Google. So is there any way to inform Google that this specific URL is username page?
Not specifically the type of page. Usually we can recognize that automatically. So when we will pick that up as a normal page on your website, and it might be like a user profile page, and we'll try to index that content. What I would watch out for is to make sure that the links that users place there are maybe no follow by default. Unless you're sure that this is a great user and you do kind of want to stick to those links. That's one really good practice. We have a really old blog post on how to deal with user profile pages, which have some other tips on what you could do to watch out for to make sure that they work well.
Can we use a person schema, like schema
Sure.
person?
Sure, definitely, yeah.
OK, thanks.
Let me run through the submitted questions quickly, and then we'll get back to more things from you all. 301 redirect or canonical tag, which one is better? We use both of these for canonicalization, and you can use both of these as well. So you can redirect to one page, and on that page have a canonical to itself. That helps us to really confirm this is the page you want to have as the canonical. Does Google reflect push state and infinite scrollings with AJAX requests? So we have an example site with kind of infinite scrolling and push state that shows what you could there. The ideal situation is that we do find links back and forth so that we have kind of this pagination setup on the site as well, in addition to the infinite scrolling. So I wouldn't rely just on push state, but instead really make sure that there's some kind of pagination that we could theoretically crawl if we were to crawl those pages directly. Our CMS auto-generates a sitemap with hundreds of broken links and 404s. We've submitted a proper sitemap which works, but the auto sitemap is still being crawled. How can I do that? Fix that. So what you could do there is probably block that sitemap by robots text and just like prevent Googlebot from actually accessing that sitemap file. I think that's probably the easiest thing to do, apart from like digging into the server and saying, well, you really shouldn't be generating the sitemap file at all. But that might be the easiest solution. Last Hangout, you said if someone is republishing feeds on a website, then it's of no value. But what if we republish 2 to 3 feeds on a website in a way that is not published elsewhere, along with some reviews? Is that a bad practice? That sounds a lot like you're still trying to sneak by, and the primary content of your page is content you're pulling in from feeds, which isn't really a good strategy, in my opinion. So I'd really recommend to make sure that the primary content of your site is something unique, compelling, and of high quality, something that you're providing. And if you use feeds to add additional value to that, then that might be a good thing. But the primary content shouldn't be something that you're pulling in from other websites. Does 508 compliance have any effect on SEO, specifically for medical websites? No, not that I'm aware of. So this is something you might need to do for legal reasons or for policy reasons, but that's not something that we would take into account on our side. What happens if we kill the home page, for example, .com page, and make city pages as home page? Does link juice pass on to all city pages and credibility go to city pages? It's location-based products. Users from Delhi will land on a Delhi city page. That's something. So it sounds like you're providing content depending on where the user is coming from, which city the user is coming from. And that's something you really need to be careful for, because Googlebot crawls primarily from the US, and it will only see the US-based content. So if you're doing something fancy for users in India, and Googlebot always crawls from the US, then it might not see all of this fancy, neat content that you're providing. So that's sometimes a tricky situation, sometimes something you kind of have to figure out what the best approach is there. I manage a Google Plus business page, and the owner has started to copy and paste my post content onto their website to use as their blog. Could this be considered duplicate content? Could it cause any problems? It could be duplicate content. So the text blocks that are copied will be duplicated, essentially. So if someone searches for a piece of that text block, we might show one of these 2 pages in the search results. From my point of view, I wouldn't see that as a critical issue. If users are finding the same content on Google+ as they're finding directly in their blog, then users are finding that content. And that's probably what you're trying to do. You're getting the word out about the products and services that you have. And that's not something I'd see as being particularly problematic. Would you recommend to clean up after automated and self-generated citations and business listings for a better Google business listing ranking? Does Google validate my business listings against unverified citations? I don't know exactly what you're referring to. But if you're saying that you have a lot of kind of like low-quality business listings for your business out there, and people are running into those low-quality entries, then that seems like something I'd clean up just from like a marketing point of view. From an SEO point of view, with regards to search in general, that's probably not the most critical thing to do. There are a lot of these kind of local business directories that just scrape things together from various sources, and usually they don't cause any big problems. But from a marketing point of view, especially if you're noticing that people are going to those pages, then that seems like something that I just clean up. In Search Console, we submitted 750 XML sitemaps, but the maximum it's showing is only 500 sitemaps. Is there any way to find all 750 sitemaps? Is there a limit for submitting XML sitemaps in Search Console? I think the 500 limit is just in the UI. So that's something to kind of be aware of in the UI. 500 sitemaps is a lot of URLs. So I think 500 times 50,000 URLs in each sitemaps that's a lot of content. You could also use sitemap index files, which might make sense for a website like that, where maybe you have fewer sitemap index files that refer to a lot of different sitemap files. That makes it a little bit easier to get that overview in Search Console. There's no limit to the number of sitemaps that you can submit, though. So if you want to go overboard and submit 1 million sitemap files, then that's kind of up to you. It probably won't be the best use of your time, but we should be able to deal with that. Can you give us an example of a well-structured or written sentence? Wow, that's hard. I don't have anything offhand this early in the morning. So I don't know. That's a tricky question towards the end. That's not fair.
Is readability something that is increasingly going to be, or is going to be taken into consideration going forward, given that we know that people are reading differently now, and obviously Google's trying to kind of emulate all the time the human behavior. So, you know, in the answer boxes, for instance, and I know yours has got like a readability kind of element to that to optimization of pages now. And we did actually start to implement some of that with this passive voice and short sentences and shorter paragraphs and whatnot. And actually, we found that there was longer dwell time, and it seemed to have quite a good impact in terms of rankings. So.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's always worth experimenting with, like finding ways to talk to your audience, finding the right tone, the right words that your audience responds to, that they understand. I think that's really critical. Probably not primarily with regards to SEO, but if you have people that are going to your website and they're confused what you're actually talking about, then they're not going to convert. They're not going to become customers. On the other hand, if you have content that really talks in their language, gives that information in a way that they can easily understand, then that's something they'll be able to kind of resonate with a lot easier.
And obviously, it kind of fits a bit more with natural language processing if it's readable. You know, if it's read in the way that is easily readable by the majority of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on your audience, essentially. So if, like, an extreme case is a medical website, if you're talking about medical topics, some people have medical websites that are written for the average person, and some people have medical websites that are written for doctors. And the way these sites are written is very different. And it's not so much that we need to figure out like which of these is the better one, because there is no better one. It really depends on who is searching, what they're searching for, how they're searching, and how they kind of react to the content that they find there. So if you have medical content and you want to talk to the average person on the street, then kind of write it in their language so that they can understand what this is actually about.
OK, thanks.
All right. Any more questions from any of you? Wow, it looks like the Q&A is filling up again already. This is terrible.
Sorry, I'm really hogging this, but
go for it.
I think this is quite I think it'll be useful. So, you know, we've got the interstitial thing coming up in January. So I was thinking about, you know, we know that Google doesn't crawl or doesn't take any notice of event stuff like on-click, blah, blah, etc., JavaScript events. So if somebody had an interstitial and it only triggered on scroll, for instance, would that be considered an interstitial that they would be penalized on? Or would the fact that somebody had actually engaged with their content, I know they probably don't want to just see a big, massive sign that says, opt into my newsletter or whatever. How would that be treated? Because obviously
that could be, yeah, that could be problematic as well. So that's something where if you're essentially blocking the content from being read by users, then that's something that we would consider problematic.
Even if it's a JavaScript triggered event and Googlebot can't, will it discover it? Will it realize it's there? Yeah. Will it fire it?
I don't know how it would handle that specifically, but these are things that we do watch out for, that we do see sites kind of do in weird ways as well. And I think it really depends on how you set this up. So if you have a long article and you scroll to the bottom and you're able to read everything, and then you see an interstitial on the bottom, then that's something that's obviously very different from a situation where you have a big header image, and as soon as you scroll up like a half a centimeter to actually read the content, the big interstitial pops up. Then that's very different. So that's something where we really want people to actually read the content when they click on the search result, where we're suggesting that this content is actually on that page. So we don't want to feel like the bad guy and say, hey, there's good content here. And they go there and it's like, I don't see anything, just this big ad.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. We're just thinking about it. That was all.
Well, what's the main thinking behind any policing of interstitials? Isn't it kind of self-policing in as much as if people don't like it, they leave? And that in turn affects the quality of the site because they don't share it, they don't build links to it. What's the difference between an interstitial that ruins a user experience or just terrible content that ruins a user experience?
I don't know. That's a tricky question, man. You come with these tricky questions in the end.
I've got a more tricky one if you want to tackle that instead. but I don't think you're allowed to answer it.
I guess between like really terrible content that's visible directly and interstitials that pop up and block you from reading the content. I think to some extent we'll be able to recognize the terrible content anyway and like highlight that in the search result and the snippet as well. So if user sees like a jumbled description based on the content from the page, then they already know kind of what to expect there. Whereas if they see something in the snippet that suggests there's really something fantastic here, and they go there and they actually kind of get blocked, then that's almost more frustrating.
But John, I mean, I guess isn't the point here that if you have an interstitial that's more than a certain size, it's effectively cloaking, which is a breach of the webmaster guidelines.
Exactly.
And so therefore it should be
comes
penalized.
into play as well, yeah.
But also on that point, presumably the difference between terrible content is terrible content probably wouldn't rank and have the visibility in the first place in search. So the chance of it being found from Google are minimalized because it's probably just not going to have the visibility there in the first place. Whereas something with an interstitial, Google's sending traffic to that page based on the content, which then the interstitial comes to hide. That's the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
But not if Google looks at that page and says this page is an interstitial. Then it just spiders the content on the interstitial, and that's the page.
That can happen as well, yeah.
And therefore, it will rank it based on the content in there and the links going to it and the age of it and everything else. And then it's essentially just terrible content. There's no difference.
I think that distinction does kind of get a bit fluid at sometimes, yeah.
So Rob, just when you're talking about the content of the page, you're talking about the fact that, for example, every Pinterest page would be indexed with the words, please subscribe to Pinterest type of thing, as opposed to the content behind it, and therefore everything takes care of itself effectively.
Yeah. Yeah, and if it's junk, it's junk. It's, and I mean, we're crossing borders between business model, marketing, and, technical SEO. But you wouldn't expect a person that owns a high street shop to, as soon as a customer runs in, run up to the door with a big board and push it in their face. So it's the same thing online, because no one would go back there because that's effectively what you're doing. And that's both a marketing effort and you should run your business online the way you would run your business offline as much as you can. And sure, if someone's about to leave your site, then show them a special offer and say, don't go, come back. But it's not the first thing you should see if you've Googled something other than what's the special offer on XYZ today.
Well, isn't that the whole point of search results, in that if a lot of people start to say, look, we hate all these interstitials, that the popularity of the pages that have interstitials should actually be suppressed in the first place? It's kind of like saying everybody hates X supermarket. Why would somebody constantly keep sending traffic to a terrible experience as such.
Basically, we all hate interstitials seems to be the overall thing going on here. But John, is there any more information yet on what ranking change will happen to sites that do this? For example, will they be filtered, or will they simply drop a few places down? You know, because I think like with the mobile one, I think, you know, there wasn't a whole lot of difference that people were seeing in many cases. But you kind of could argue that if interstitials are indeed cloaking, which they are, when they reach a certain size, if they are breach of webmaster guidelines for that reason, then they should kind of be filtered out the SERPs altogether. They shouldn't just kind of drop from 2 to 4 kind of thing.
Are you expecting him to say 4.5 spaces?
Announced there, but in general, like when we talk about ranking changes, we're not talking about removing sites from search. So we're talking about moving things around. And usually what also happens is if people are explicitly looking for your website, then of course we'll still show that. So if someone is searching for any site that uses big interstitials, and we notice that, and it's like, I want to go to John's website with the stupid interstitial, then we'll point them at that site. So it wouldn't be like useful for us to filter that out. But if, on the other hand, if someone is searching for, I don't know, 301 redirect, and it happens to be on John's website with the big interstitial, then maybe we'll demote John's website and show something else that doesn't have an interstitial there.
But that is kind of what you're talking about. Is kind of a filter, because even with Penguin and Panda, if someone is specifically looking for sites, they do a kind of navigational search. That site will still appear.
Sure.
So
you're
kind of described as still a filter.
From what I see with regards to filters is really something that we would only do for really problematic web spam violations, where the web spam team would say it really doesn't make sense to show the site at all. If they're really doing hardcore cloaking, if they're posting a lot of gibberish, a lot of auto-generated content, then that's something where the web spam team will say, this is kind of useless for us to even show in search. But if it's just lower quality, if it's not that great, then we'll still show it. We'll just try to show it appropriately in the rankings.
OK.
All right.
I have to. Thumbs down. Is it like a thumbs down, John? Like you've got like the thumbs up, thumbs down thing. Is it almost like you just got a little bit of a thumbs down if you've got an interstitial?
I don't know. Thumbs up, thumbs down. I have to think about that one. I have to take a break now. I'll set up the new Hangouts with the new format and figure out how to get those event listings out there and find maybe some way to collect questions ahead of time. Questions during the Hangout will probably work with the slide setup that we used last time. But I hope to see some of you again in the future Hangouts. And until then, have a great weekend and a good time. Bye, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.